Hey guys, welcome back for today's video where I'm going to be running through 5 brand new national 2020 Democratic primary polls that have been released over this past day, and some very interesting data on how the race has been shifting around in terms of the support behind these respective candidates in comparison to the prior national polls that we've been getting from these polling resources. So before running through and taking a look at all of that data, if you haven't already, consider subscribing to the YouTube channel. I'm going to be tracking this race throughout its entirety and continuing to update the number of pledged delegates that all of these candidates have been accumulating and where they're at in terms of their percentage of getting towards that 1,990 pledged delegates needed to win on the first ballot at the Democratic Convention. I'm going to be keeping track of this throughout the entire process and continuing to update you guys on that. And then also just kind of a fun thing on the side, I'm going to be making first, second, and third place predictions for every single caucus and primary throughout this entire primary season, and keeping track in terms of the accuracy that I have making these predictions beforehand and then comparing them after the fact, where I went right, where I went wrong. Just kind of a fun thing to do on the side, on top of the most important thing, which is tracking exactly where this race is going to be going as we get these vote totals in and these pledged delegates divvied up among the respective candidates. It's going to be very fun and interesting as we work our way through the coming months, and consider subscribing and following the channel as I keep you guys as much up to date as I possibly can. So now running through these 5 brand new national polls. So this one just came out. It's from NBC News and the Wall Street Journal. Bernie Sanders catapults himself into first place, technically a statistical tie at the top within the margin of error. Bernie Sanders eking it out here at 27%. He's up 6 percentage points from the prior NBC News Wall Street Journal poll that was taken in December, whereas Biden takes a little bit of a step back. He loses 2 points nationally. Warren there in third place, she loses 3 percentage points. Bloomberg gains 5 points, up to 9%. Buttigieg loses 2 points, down to 7. Klobuchar stays steady right there at 5 points, whereas Andrew Yang picks up a point. He's at 4%. Steyer, he is picking up a point to 2%, and then Gabbard staying even right there at 2 percentage points. So out of all of the candidates here, definitely the most positive news for Sanders as he catapults himself into first place and gains the most support out of all of these different options, whereas Biden and Warren take a little bit of a step back. And then Bloomberg, also a positive sign for him that he picks up 5 percentage points from the prior result. Now moving over to Zogby Analytics, and also forgot to mention that prior poll had about 430 respondents. This one pretty similar at around 440 likely voter responding in this Zogby Analytics poll. And in comparison to the prior result that we got from Zogby Analytics, Joe Biden loses 4 percentage points. He was at 28%. Now he's at 24%. Whereas Bernie Sanders gains 4 percentage points. He was at 20%, 8 points behind Biden, but he closes that gap, gains 4 points, and is now tied at the top with Biden, each of them grabbing 24 percentage points of support, whereas the rest of the field is rather significantly behind those top 2 options, where you have Warren and Bloomberg tied there in third place at 11 percentage points. Not a great poll here from Warren, as Bloomberg closes the gap between himself and the Massachusetts senator. And then we have Pete Buttigieg at 8%, Andrew Yang at 6%, Klobuchar at 4%, Tom Steyer at 3%, Tulsi Gabbard at 2%, and then everyone else is below that point in terms of where this Democratic field is at. Now moving over and taking a look at where the national numbers are with this week's Reuters Ipsos poll, and a little bit of change, but not really all that much throughout the entire field. Actually, the upper tier candidates all just taking a slight step back, where you have Biden losing around a percentage point. He was at 24, and this one he's around 23. In second place, Bernie Sanders losing around 2 points. Last week he was at 20. This one he's around 18. Elizabeth Warren losing around a percentage point and a half, where she's now in this one at 10.4 percentage points, but all well within the realm of reasonability from where these candidates were a week ago. And then we have Bloomberg taking a step forward. He actually surpasses Elizabeth Warren in this instance, where he's now up to 11.5%. Buttigieg actually takes quite a bit of a step back, loses 3 points, down to just 3.6% nationally in this one, where Tom Steyer leapfrogs Buttigieg in this one up to 4.2%. Also, Andrew Yang surpasses Buttigieg. He's at 3.9%. Tulsi Gabbard stays there right a little bit above 1 percentage point. And Amy Klobuchar takes a step back in this one, where she's now at just 2.1 percentage points. It doesn't seem like that New York Times endorsement has done anything for Klobuchar in terms of her national support. Now, particularly with the candidates of Buttigieg and Klobuchar. They are not polling very well nationally at all, but there's still a puncher's chance for these two individuals because they're polling still quite a bit better in Iowa and New Hampshire than what their national numbers are telling us. So we're going to learn a lot about this race over the next couple of weeks, particularly with campaigns that are pretty much putting everything they got into those first two results. And if they don't have the kind of success that they're hoping for, then we could see these kind of candidates bow out after that point in time. So then just a couple of more polls to touch on. And now moving over to take a look at some brand new data out of Pew Research. Really solid sample size here of nearly 6,000 Democratic and Democratic-leaning voters. You have Biden staying steady there at the top at 26%, where Sanders takes a big step forward, gains 7 percentage points from that prior result, closing the gap again between himself and Biden at the top. Also, actually, Elizabeth Warren staying even from where she was in the prior Pew Research poll, whereas Buttigieg, he gains a couple of points up to 7%. Bloomberg, this is his first initial result, picks up 5% of support. Andrew Yang gains 2% up to 3% nationally. And then also another one of these national polls that are not looking good for Amy Klobuchar, where she's pulling in just 2 percentage points. Now to wrap things up, I want to close things out taking a look at the Hill and Harris X, and I'm not sure what took them so long to release these numbers. The poll was taken between January 20th through the 22nd, but they just released the numbers yesterday, so essentially a little over a week from when this poll was taken. But nonetheless, this one is the most bullish on Joe Biden, which has tended to be the case from the Hill throughout this process, where this has consistently been one of the top performing polls for Joe Biden, and he leads the way in this one, grabbing 29% of support, staying even from where he was a week prior to that. That previous poll was taken right around where the January debate was, around January 13th through the 14th. In second place, it's Bernie Sanders at 17% of support. He loses a couple of points, whereas Bloomberg, he gains the most in this one. He gains 4 points up to 11% of support. Warren drops a couple of points to 9%, and then Buttigieg, he's right at 5%, Yang at 4%, along with Tom Steyer at 4%, and another not so great look for Klobuchar nationally at 2 percentage points, and Gabbard also at 2%. So that's how this final poll is shaping up. Now taking a look at the average of the national polls and some really interesting dynamics that we have here. So first and foremost, what I find very interesting is Sanders and Warren have essentially swapped places from where we were back in October. This is when Sanders was working his way through his health concern, and Warren had a lot of positive momentum at that period of time. But essentially since that point, Sanders has appeared to do a lot better in terms of getting key progressive endorsements and more or less coalescing that progressive support behind his campaign, in contrast to where Elizabeth Warren is at. It seems like she was more so maybe trying to not just hold on to that progressive vote, but maybe pull in some more centrists and moderates to try to officially close that gap between her campaign and Biden. It seems to have backfired, as she's now in a clear third place in the average of the national polls. And then the other interesting thing here is Joe Biden, he's kind of more or less been hovering around that upper 20 percentage point range throughout this process. He was able to gain a little bit there a couple of weeks ago, and now kind of just taking a very slight step back, whereas Bloomberg during this period of time has taken a bit of a step forward. And I think it makes the most sense that as we work our way through this process, if Bloomberg continues to gain, it's more likely to take away from Biden's support than Sanders or Warren, so that could tighten up this race at the top. What I think is most likely as we work our way through primary season to be the case is a 1-2 race at the top between Sanders and Biden, very close and competitive throughout primary season. But I think there's also a chance where if Sanders performs very well in the early states and maybe he's able to catch or maybe even surpass Biden in the national polls, you might get a scenario where a lot of these centrist and moderate voters, they might sour on Biden. Maybe they don't think he's the best option to go against Sanders if he's performing not so great in those early results. That could possibly be a catalyst for Bloomberg to gain even more so in the polls than what we have seen from him over the past handful of months. He clearly has the financial resources to be a factor throughout the entire primary season, and that could potentially be the other race that we get here. Again, if Biden fades back and Bloomberg kind of takes the mantle of the centrist moderate candidate, maybe we get a race at the top between Sanders and Bloomberg at the end of the day. That's also something that could potentially happen, but we'll see if that is the case or not as we start working our way through primary season. And that's going to wrap this one up, guys. Again, if you haven't already considered subscribing to the YouTube channel, I'm going to be trying to produce as much relevant content as possible in terms of tracking exactly where the candidates are at as we work our way through this process in terms of how many pledge delegates they're picking up and how close they're getting to winning the nomination. And then also, of course, going through making my predictions and tracking how accurate I am throughout this process. It's going to be a really fun time, and I hope you guys come along for this ride. I hope to see you back here again for my next video.